let's talk about some Deep Space Nine comics. After watching the What We Left Behind documentary, we were so pumped up about Deep Space Nine. We're in the middle of our Deep Space Nine rewatch because we cycle through the Star Trek episodes. So we always have Star Trek in some way, somehow in our household. And it's just the perfect time to revisit these classics from the early 90s.
This was a fun series to read.
So we're going to start discussing issues 1 through 10 in this issue of StarPodTrek, and we'll save the other blocks of comics for subsequent episodes. Stowaway, Part 1 and 2 by Mike W. Barr. That was the first two issues of the comic, and it was cover date August 1993. So this is early on in Deep Space Nine's run of a television series. We know that previously DC Comics, or I should say at the same time, DC Comics had the license to the original series as well as Next Generation, but Malibu Comics held the license for Deep Space Nine. What did you think about these first two issues?
Well, the first two issues I didn't really like as much. I thought all the others were better. But this one, so the first one actually started during the first season of the show. So the characters weren't as well developed. You have to think about things like that. I mean,
yeah, you have to put it in the frame of mind of the time it was in too. Yes. So it was a Nog and Jake based story of their foolishness. So you kind of have to chalk that up to what characters that they were developing at the time too. One thing that we totally agreed upon is how fantastic the artwork is by Gordon Purcell and Terry Pallett. I mean, Gordon Purcell has done Star Trek work before, and he's just a master of facial features and character likenesses.
The characters look good for a comic book. They don't really look stale in these. They have some color and some character to them.
Old Wounds, issue 3. This is where it really started feeling more like the depth of Deep Space Nine.
And this was a story focusing on a new Cardassian character. Introducing new characters as guest stars in the comics was great because it's just like the episodes, and to have them in a story. It was an interesting story about a Cardassian who was born on Bajor.
Mm-hmm. And know what I appreciated about the detail? You could tell that the people involved in this love Star Trek. If you notice when they show the old Cardassian, he's actually wearing the old armor style, the one that the Cardassians wore on Next Generation, not the current ones that they were showing on Deep Space Nine.
Yes, it looks like it from the first episode when they had the Cardassians. Yes.
So I love that attention to detail, that there's history involved in Star Trek. And that's one of the reasons why we love Star Trek so much, is because of the continuity. And we notice things like the differences in collars of uniforms or just the minutia. And so this series actually felt like it truly belonged in the Star Trek Deep Space Nine universe.
Another thing, in most of these, just about all of these episodes actually have Morn as well. Like you can tell he's there.
Yes, I love that.
And this was even before he was really popular and talked about in fandom. But yeah, like he was on the show and he's in these comics.
Mm-hmm. In issue 4 and 5, entitled Emancipation, also written by Mike W. Barr.
This was the one about the slaves that came from the Gamma Quadrant. Now, a lot of these stories, had to do with finding new things in the Gamma Quadrant, mm-hmm. which was something that was anticipated. Right at the beginning of the story, of the show, they always wanted to have since we're next to this new unexplored area, we have to explore it more. So they developed that a lot in these comics.
Mm-hmm. And these are issues that, the first season of Deep Space Nine, looking at where, for the liberties that they took in the comics for what the show was doing at that time, was pretty impressive, because even modern comics, the current shows that come out will actually make the comic book version not worthwhile because the show goes into a different direction. But the writers here have skated the line of character development, not going too far away of what will be developed later, but staying within to the realm of staying, I would say, interesting, but not crossing the line. And I enjoyed this story very much so.
I think they had a lot of latitude with this at the beginning of Deep Space Nine. So I think there was more potential.
Yeah, but they didn't do anything crazy.
Right, they didn't.
They didn't go off kilter, which, what was the last, the first Discovery comic series based on the Klingons?
Yes.
Already because of the show, what they're telling us about Klingons, about their hair growth and things like that neutralizes that comic series because they showed every Klingon bald in the comics.
You mean with the second season of Discovery?
Season of Discovery.
Right. It didn't keep the continuity with the comics.
The continuity of the comics because they decided to change gears all of a sudden because of fan backlash. And whereas we're not seeing this here. We're seeing that, okay, they have something to work with. They know that they're really not going to go crazy with character development, but they didn't have much to work with because there was only season 1 at this time.
Right.
But they really got what I noticed specifically is the dialogue. They really got the dialogue down of how Benjamin Sisko would speak. You could actually hear Sisko speaking. The dialogue of Quark and his snarkiness.
It was well done, yes. Mm-hmm. And you have to consider too, like with Discovery, the writers of the comics spoke to the writers of the TV show to try to make it consistent. But then it's like that didn't really work, did it? I mean, they tried, but then in the end they still decided to do something else. But with Deep Space Nine, with these, where I don't think the writers of these comics actually were talking to the writers of the show, but they still were able to stay within continuity.
Yeah, we're in preparation for this. We have a back issue of Comics Values Monthly, where it talks about Malibu gaining the license for this and how important it was for everyone on the team to be Star Trek fans. And it's so obvious that they weren't just random hired writers to write science fiction, kind of like the Gold Key comics were. I mean, the Star Trek Gold Key comics, they're fun to read because they're so outrageous. They're so wrong on so many levels. But this series, you could tell it's like what DC was doing with when they had Michael Jan Friedman and Peter David. They had people who really knew Trek involved. And so it's refreshing to read these comics even though they're over 20 years old. One special treasure out of this issue, and this is one of the fun things about how we collect the original comics. We don't read them online or get the trade paperbacks because you're able to look at the ads and read the letter columns. We discovered that our friend Adam Throne wrote a letter in this issue that got printed.
How cool is that?
It was. We were so excited about this.
He's a friend of ours that lives in Atlanta now. So, yes. Yeah, that's great.
So at the time, he was living in Sarasota Springs, New York, where he went to college. It is a very lengthy letter. But one thing I appreciate about it is that he noticed that in issue 1, I may read it to you. Does Entertainment Tonight's John Tesh know that he's a starship captain in the 24th century? Commander Johnson looked awfully suspicious. I suspect that more cameos would be fun. Just don't overdo it. Thanks for the enjoyable romp into the 24th century. I look forward to many future issues. So if you do look at issue 1, you're going to see Commander Johnson does look totally like John Tesh.
You know, I couldn't figure it out at the time. Like, who does he look like? He did look like some handsome movie star,
yeah, exactly,
really.
Yes.
He looked young and you know, he was blonde and he
yes, you're
looked very handsome.
Like you say. What's the reason why you like the Fifth Doctor? You told me. Why is the Fifth Doctor your favorite Doctor?
He was handsome.
All right, so here's the response. Thanks for the very thoughtful critique, Adam, and to answer the most pressing question of the letter page. Yes, Mr. Tesh knows we used his likeness. We naturally had to ask him first.
Oh, so that's
How
interesting.
Cool is that?
So he gave his permission.
Yes. So in issue 1, that truly was modeled after John Tesh.
Well, I think John Tesh did play a Klingon on Star Trek, right?
He was. Yeah,
yes,
he's a
definitely.
Star Trek fan.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Star Trek is expanding its universe with a spin-off called Deep Space Nine. The series will trek to a remote space station to follow the adventures of a new cast and crew. Get ready to beam up to the world of Deep Space Nine. The new series centers on a group of Starfleet officers who take over a hostile alien space station. At the helm is Commander Benjamin Sisko, played by Avery Brooks, making his maiden voyage into the world of science fiction.
There are all kinds of new terms and new ideas, yeah. But again, I'm a rookie. I'm learning. This is my first time here, yeah.
Mr. O'Brien, can you establish a high-energy Thoron field before they get into sensor range?
Serving under Brooks is an intergalactic squadron of officers, including Chief Operations Man Colum Meaney, transported over from the Next Generation series, and Alien First Officer Nana Visitor.
Red alert. Shields up.
What shields?
The thing that is the most exciting is the script and the fact that the women in the show are very strong, very powerful, and that it's a lot to do with what's going on in the world right now.
But one of Deep Space Nine's biggest stars, literally, is the show's massive array of futuristic sets. Production designer Herman Zimmerman and his crew spent over $2 million bringing the 24th century to life.
We have 3 of the largest sound stages on the Paramount lot, and we are filling each of those 3 stages with very bizarre scenery.
Providing the show's comic relief is veteran actor Rene Aubergenois as Obo, a shape-shifting alien in charge of the station's security. The role requires hours of daily makeup for Rene, but he says there's only one drawback to his altered state.
It's not hot, it's not itchy, it's not, I only eat frozen yogurt while I'm in it, but other than that, it's not very uncomfortable.
A special 2-hour debut episode of Deep Space Nine will be launched during the first week of January.
Issue number
6.
6 is...
The one that had the 3 stories.
That was a weird one. Just because, for me, it was too rushed, having 3 stories. The second 2 stories I liked better, but you gotta figure a comic only has 20-something pages. To make it into 3 stories, it's almost like sometimes the Waypoint comics, I think, are too rushed of the IDW comics. What did you think about the 3-story format in one comic?
I thought it was pretty good. Let's see, the second story with Quark and Bashir was the one I wasn't quite sure about. And maybe the first one was a little rough because you don't know how would Keiko really react on the runabout full of kids when the other 2 adults had been made unconscious. But they were still fun stories to read. And I think that they were still good stories. And I think they were trying to emulate the show actually had an A, B, and C story on some episodes, and maybe they were trying to do a little bit with that by having 3 stories. I mean, just a thought, but maybe they were trying to like they had all these ideas and couldn't make them full stories and just wanted to make them like, well, we'll just put these short stories in one comic. And it was the only time they did that out of the first 10. So I think they did a good job. And also these comics, when we're reading these, don't they seem to be like, they have more pages of story than the ones with the IDW. Like as far as the story, it took up less pages in the comics, it feels like. I think these stories were a little bit longer.
I do. I like this old school format much better than the modern format, but there's no way around it. Comic books are not going to make self-contained issues on a regular basis. They're not going to make 2-issue story arcs on a regular basis. It seems like the way they're doing it now is them having massive page spreads and very little dialogue. So you have to buy 5 issues when you could have told that story in 2 issues.
That's right. I do like how these are either one story. Most of them are either one or like 2 comics that have one story in a comic, or a story that's spread out over 2 issues.
Nothing feels like it's dragging out.
Right. Instead of having it continued. I mean, we've read some of the other IDW comics had like a 5-issue series, which wasn't too bad. They don't go on too long, but
if it fits,
it still could have been shorter.
If it fits the format correctly, it's a good length. But some modern comics are really taking the idea of double page splashes too far, where it feels like filler. Whereas that's one of the things that we're noticing about this series is we're getting some meat out of it. We're really enjoying it to the full because of how it's written and concentrating the stories.
Another thing about these Deep Space Nine stories also, they seem to have a lot of dialogue. I mean, I think it took me longer to read these than some other comics because these seem to have much more dialogue than a lot of other comic stories.
But it's just like the TV show.
It is.
The TV show is very dialogue driven, so I think they've tapped into that. Issue 7, Working Vacation, by Lynn Straczynski.
This one, it was a good story, but some of it you still have to shake your head.
Some of it was a little bit absurd, but I think they got the character development of Kira down pat.
Yes, the way Kira didn't like the way the society of this planet was structured, it was too close to home for her. Yes.
One thing I didn't like about it is when she was being counseled that Commander Sisko said, You've crossed the line. You've broken the Prime Directive. And she said, I'm not Starfleet. I don't have a Prime Directive. Like, I was thinking that. I was like, she has no limits.
Well, that's
right?
That's one of the things the writer said about this show. Cause at first they wanted to have Ensign Ro, but since Michelle Forbes turned down the part, and then they created this new character, Kira, and then they realized, well, Kira's not part of Starfleet, so she can do much more. She's a character that actually has more that she can talk about and rebel against and give it to Sisko.
Yes. Yep. So on that aspect of it, I did like her character development. Issues 8 and 9, Requiem, parts 1 and 2, by Mark A. Altman. What'd you think about that story?
I love that story. And also I have to say...
It was fantastic.
Mark A. Altman is also a journalist. He's the one who wrote the Cinefantastique articles that were, on Deep Space Nine. He did it every season, and he would do a write-up of each episode, and it was just great. I always looked forward to his write-ups. So now to see that he is also a good fiction writer is wonderful.
Yes.
Oh, and I saw him at DragonCon. Just have to say that, too.
You've seen it's come down to it. I'm making a checklist of people who you haven't seen because it's way easier than checking off who you have seen.
Yes.
But, okay, what was he like as a person?
He seemed a nice guy. I think he was very serious. And and he was just, of course, he's someone who knows so much about it. He's one of the Star Trek experts. So it was just great to hear him just talk about it.
And he was involved in that movie Free Enterprise.
Yes, wasn't he one of the characters in the movie?
He acted in it. He did some writing and producing as well. Mm-hmm. And we will end our discussion of this portion. We're going to divide this into multiple segments, but issue number 10, Descendants by Dan Mishkin.
And that was that was a good story too, about false prophets.
Ties into the series immensely. We're seeing the Bajorans are desperately looking for the prophets. They're looking for someone for guidance, and when someone even looks like a prophet, many are latched onto them.
Yes, and the Bajorans just went crazy for these aliens. It was a good story, and also I think it was this one, or it might have been the previous issue that had the teaser about an upcoming Klingon story.
That's right. Yes. So there is a Hearts and Minds miniseries that we will be discussing down the road. We look forward to that. But next month we will continue our discussion of Malibu Comics Deep Space Nine series.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long, and may the Force be with you. Nanu Nanu.